What happens when a legendary martial artist and Hollywood icon sits down for what should be a friendly interview, only to find himself ambushed on live television? Tonight we're breaking down the explosive confrontation that ended with Chuck Norris walking off the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live, and the shocking reason why millions are now calling for accountability from one of late night's biggest hosts. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about what went down. Now, let's dive in. The audience settled into their seats, the familiar energy of a late-night talk show buzzing through the studio. Chuck Norris walked out to applause, that signature calm confidence radiating from him as he took his seat across from Jimmy Kimmel. At 75 years old, Chuck still carried himself with the poise of someone half his age, dressed sharp in a dark blazer and jeans. The crowd cheered, clearly excited to see the action legend in person. Jimmy started with a smile, leaning back in his chair. "Chuck Norris, everybody. Man, it's great to have you here. You know, I've been waiting to get you on this show for years." Chuck nodded politely. "Well, I appreciate the invitation, Jimmy. Good to be here." "So let's jump right in," Jimmy said, his tone casual but his eyes glinting with something else. "You've been in the public eye for what? 5 decades now? Action movies, Walker Texas Ranger, martial arts champion. But lately, you've been making headlines for different reasons. You've been pretty vocal about your political views, your stance on certain social issues. Some people might say, you've become a bit controversial." The audience went quiet, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Chuck's expression didn't change. "I've always spoken my mind, Jimmy. That's nothing new. I believe in standing up for what I think is right." Sure, Jimmy replied, waving his hand dismissively. "But don't you think there's a difference between speaking your mind and, I don't know, alienating half your fan base? I mean, you've said some things that have rubbed a lot of people the wrong way." Chuck tilted his head slightly. "Can you be more specific?" Jimmy leaned forward, his smile widening but not reaching his eyes. "Well, let's talk about your comments on patriotism, on traditional values. You've criticized people who don't share your worldview pretty harshly. Don't you think that's a bit, I don't know, out of touch?" "Out of touch with what?" Chuck asked calmly. "With reality," Jimmy shot back. "With where we are as a society. I mean, Chuck, you grew up in a different era. The world has changed. Maybe your views need to evolve too." The audience offered scattered applause, and Chuck took a breath before responding. "Jimmy, I grew up in a time when people respected each other's differences, without trying to silence anyone who disagreed. That's what I stand for. If that makes me out of touch, then I'll wear that label proudly." Jimmy chuckled, but it came across condescending. "Okay, but here's the thing. You talk about respect, but you've also said some pretty harsh things about people who don't see things your way. You've questioned their patriotism, their values. Isn't that a bit hypocritical?" Chuck's jaw tightened just slightly. "I've questioned actions and policies, not people's right to exist or have an opinion. There's a difference, and I think you know that." "Do I?" Jimmy leaned back again, arms crossed. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you want everyone to fall in line with your version of America. Your version of what's right and wrong." "That's not true," Chuck said firmly. "I want people to think critically, to stand for something meaningful. But I also believe in certain principles that this country was founded on. Freedom, responsibility, self-reliance. Those aren't partisan ideas, Jimmy. They're universal." Jimmy smirked. "Universal according to who?" "You?" "Look, Chuck. I respect your career. You're a legend in action movies, martial arts, all that. But when it comes to social commentary, maybe you should stick to roundhouse kicks and leave the thinking to people who actually understand the complexities of modern society." The audience gasped audibly. Chuck stared at Jimmy for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice measured but carrying an edge. "So you invited me here to insult me?" No, Jimmy said quickly, holding up his hands in mock defense. "I invited you here for a conversation. But if you can't handle a little pushback, maybe you're not as tough as your movies make you out to be." Chuck didn't flinch. "I can handle pushback just fine, Jimmy. What I don't appreciate is being disrespected, in front of an audience. You're not interested in a conversation. You're interested in making me look bad to score points with your crowd. Oh, come on, Jimmy said, laughing. Don't be so sensitive. This is late-night TV. We poke fun. We challenge our guests. It's all in good fun. There's a difference between challenging someone and ambushing them, Chuck replied. You asked me here under the pretense of a respectful interview, and instead you're trying to paint me as some out-of-touch relic. That's not fun, Jimmy. That's dishonest. The audience was split now, some clapping for Chuck, others staying silent. Jimmy's smile faded slightly. All right, let's get real then. Your whole tough guy persona, this image you've built, it works great for movies, but in real life, you support policies and people that hurt everyday Americans. How do you square that? What policies are you talking about? Chuck asked. Immigration? Healthcare? Gun control? Jimmy rattled off. You've been pretty clear about where you stand, and frankly, a lot of us think you're on the wrong side of history. Chuck leaned forward now, his presence commanding. Jimmy, I've spent my life serving this country, training young people, building programs to help kids in need. I've put my money and my time where my mouth is. What have you done besides sit behind a desk and lecture people? The question hung in the air, and Jimmy's face reddened. I use my platform to speak truth to power. I call out hypocrisy when I see it. You use your platform to attack people who don't agree with you. Chuck countered. There's a difference between speaking truth and tearing others down. And right now, you're doing the latter. Jimmy's tone shifted, becoming sharper. You know what, Chuck? Maybe the reason you're so defensive is because deep down, you know you're wrong. You know the world has passed you by, and instead of adapting, you're clinging to outdated ideas. Chuck stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. The audience fell completely silent. I came here tonight because I thought we could have an honest conversation. But you're not interested in honesty, Jimmy. You're interested in humiliation. And I don't need to sit here and be disrespected by someone who thinks being clever is the same as being right. Jimmy stood as well, his voice rising. Oh, so now you're walking out? What, can't take the heat? I thought Chuck Norris was supposed to be this tough guy, but here you are, running away because someone challenged you. Chuck looked at him with steely calm. I'm not running from anything. I'm choosing not to waste my time with someone who doesn't argue in good faith. There's a difference. Yeah, there's a difference, Jimmy shot back. The difference is, I'm not afraid to call out someone when they're spreading harmful ideas. You want to talk about respect? How about respecting the people who are hurt by the things you advocate for? Chuck's voice dropped lower, more intense. I've spent decades helping people, Jimmy. Building schools, mentoring kids, supporting veterans. What have you built besides a platform to mock anyone who doesn't kiss the ring? The two men stood facing each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Jimmy pointed toward the camera. This is what happens when someone can't defend their positions. They storm off, play the victim. Chuck turned to face him fully. I'm not playing anything. But let me ask you something, Jimmy. Do you actually believe the things you're saying? Or are you just performing for your audience? Because if you really cared about dialogue, about understanding different perspectives, you wouldn't have started this interview with an agenda. My agenda, Jimmy said through gritted teeth, is to hold people accountable. And you, Chuck, have said and done things that deserve to be questioned. Then question me. Chuck replied evenly. But do it with respect. Do it like you actually want an answer, instead of just trying to embarrass me. That's the difference between a journalist and a bully. Jimmy's face flushed darker. I'm a bully? That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of punching people. In movies, Chuck said firmly. In controlled environments where everyone knows it's not real. You're trying to hurt me right here, right now, in front of millions of people. And you're doing it because you think it'll make you look good. The standoff continued, neither man backing down. Security began moving toward the stage, unsure if they needed to intervene. Jimmy's producer was frantically gesturing from offstage, trying to signal for a commercial break. But Jimmy wasn't done. You want to know why I'm pressing you? Jimmy asked, his voice loud now. Because people like you, with your influence, your platform, you spread ideas that divide us. You make it harder for us to move forward as a country. And someone needs to call that out. Chuck's response was measured, but the intensity in his eyes was unmistakable. You're dividing us right now, Jimmy. This whole interview, this whole setup, it's designed to create conflict. Not understanding, not dialogue. Conflict. And you're blaming me for the very thing you're doing. That's convenient, Jimmy sneered. Turn it around on me. Classic deflection. You can't defend your positions, so you attack the person asking the questions. I'm not attacking you, Chuck said quietly. I'm pointing out that you didn't invite me here to learn anything or to have a real conversation. You invited me here to make an example of me. To show your audience that anyone who thinks differently than you is fair game for ridicule. Jimmy threw his hands up. Oh, here we go. The persecution complex. Nobody's persecuting you, Chuck. You're a wealthy, famous, privileged man. You don't get to play the victim card. I'm not playing victim, Chuck replied, his voice steady. I'm calling out dishonesty when I see it. You set a trap, Jimmy. You pretended this would be a respectful interview, and then you ambushed me the moment I sat down. That's not journalism. That's not entertainment. That's just mean-spirited. The audience was fully engaged now, some people standing, others filming on their phones. The energy in the room had shifted from entertainment to genuine confrontation. Jimmy took a step closer to Chuck, his finger pointing. You know what your problem is? Jimmy said, his voice dripping with contempt. You can't accept that the world doesn't revolve around your outdated values anymore. You're stuck in some fantasy version of America that never really existed, and rather than grow and learn, you're doubling down on ignorance. Chuck's eyes narrowed. And your problem, Jimmy, is that you think anyone who disagrees with you must be ignorant. You've surrounded yourself with people who tell you you're right about everything, and now you can't handle when someone pushes back. That's not enlightenment. That's arrogance. Arrogance? Jimmy laughed harshly. I'm arrogant? You literally built a brand around being untouchable. Chuck Norris doesn't cry. Chuck Norris doesn't lose. Your entire identity is based on this inflated sense of superiority. Those are jokes, Chuck said firmly. Internet memes that people created. I never asked for that. But you actively cultivate this image of moral superiority. You sit up here night after night telling people what to think, who to hate, what's acceptable and what's not. And anyone who doesn't fall in line gets this treatment. Jimmy's jaw clenched. I'm trying to make the world better. I'm trying to use my voice for good. What are you doing besides clinging to the past? I'm living my values instead of just talking about them, Chuck answered. I don't need to broadcast every good thing I do. I don't need applause for having the right opinions. I just do what I believe is right and let my actions speak for themselves. How noble, Jimmy said sarcastically. Saint Chuck, everybody. Too pure for the rest of us mortals. You know what I think? I think you can't handle being challenged because you're used to being surrounded by yes men. People who worship you because you played tough guys in movies. But this is the real world, Chuck. And in the real world, your ideas have consequences. Chuck took a deep breath, his composure still intact despite the verbal assault. What consequences are you talking about, specifically? What have I said or done that's caused harm? You support politicians who want to take away people's rights? Jimmy fired back. You promote ideologies that marginalize vulnerable communities. You use your platform to push a narrative that benefits the powerful at the expense of the powerless. That's a lot of accusations with no specifics, Chuck observed. You're speaking in generalities because you don't actually have concrete examples. You just don't like that I don't agree with your political views, so you're dressing it up as moral outrage. Jimmy's face was red now, his voice rising even higher. I don't need to list every single thing. Your record speaks for itself. Everyone watching knows exactly what I'm talking about. You're on the wrong side of every major issue facing this country. According to you, Chuck said calmly, according to your worldview. But there are millions of people who see things differently, and they're not all ignorant or hateful. They're regular people trying to live their lives according to their values. And you sitting here telling them they're wrong, that they need to think like you, that's not progress, Jimmy. That's authoritarianism dressed up as compassion. The audience erupted, some cheering for Chuck, others booing. Jimmy had to raise his voice to be heard over the noise. Don't you dare compare me to an authoritarian. I'm fighting for equality, for justice, for human rights. You're fighting to maintain systems of oppression. What systems? Chuck challenged. Be specific. Tell me exactly what systems of oppression I'm supporting. Jimmy sputtered for a moment, caught off guard by the direct question. The entire structure of inequality in this country. Economic disparity, racial injustice, gender discrimination. All of it. And you think I support those things? Chuck asked, his voice cutting through the chaos. You think I want people to suffer? I grew up poor, Jimmy. I know what struggle looks like. I've dedicated my life to helping young people overcome obstacles. But I also believe in personal responsibility. In earning what you achieve, in not making excuses. Those aren't hateful beliefs. I think things. 70 sis. Bootstraps, Jimmy scoffed. The old bootstrap myth. Just work hard, and you'll succeed. Completely ignoring systemic barriers, inherited wealth, privilege of every kind. It's a fairy tale, Chuck, and it's dangerous because it lets people like you ignore the real problems. Chuck shook his head slowly. I'm not ignoring real problems. I'm saying that the solutions you're proposing, more government control, more dependency, more division based on identity, those aren't solutions. They're making things worse. And I have the right to say that, without being called a bigot. You have the right to say it. Jimmy agreed, his tone mocking. And I have the right to call you out for it. That's how free speech works. You can say what you want, and I can tell you when you're wrong. Except you're not just saying I'm wrong. Chuck pointed out. You're trying to destroy my character. You're implying I'm a bad person because I don't share your political views. There's a difference between disagreement and demonization. Jimmy stepped even closer, invading Chuck's personal space. Maybe you are a bad person. Did you ever consider that? Maybe supporting the things you support, saying the things you say. Maybe that makes you complicit in harm. Chuck stood his ground, not backing away an inch. And who decides what's harmful? You? Your audience? The mob on social media? I've lived long enough to see moral panics come and go, to see what's considered acceptable change with the wind. I'm not going to bend my principles because you or anyone else demands it. Principles, Jimmy laughed bitterly. You call it principles. I call it stubbornness. Refusal to grow. I admit when I'm wrong all the time, Chuck said quietly. I've made plenty of mistakes in my life, and I've owned them. But I'm not wrong about this, Jimmy. I'm not wrong to stand up for what I believe in, even when it's unpopular, even when people like you try to tear me down for it. The producer was now on stage, trying to get Jimmy's attention, trying to cut to commercial. But Jimmy waved him off aggressively. We're not done here. Chuck came on my show. He's going to hear what I have to say. Your show, Chuck repeated. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Control. You control the narrative here. You control the audience, the cameras, the edit. And you thought you could control me too. I don't need to control anything, Jimmy snapped. I'm asking you tough questions. That's my job. No, Chuck said firmly. Your job is to entertain and inform. What you're doing is neither. You're trying to humiliate me because you think it'll get you ratings, or applause, or whatever it is you need to feel validated. But it's not working, Jimmy. Because at the end of the day, I know who I am. I know what I stand for, and nothing you say is going to change that. Jimmy's expression hardened. You know what I think? I think you came here expecting to be worshipped. You thought you'd sit down, tell some stories about your glory days, and everyone would clap. But when someone actually challenges you, when someone holds a mirror up to your beliefs, you can't handle it. A mirror? Chuck's voice remained steady. You're not holding up a mirror. You're throwing mud and hoping some of it sticks. There's a difference between challenging someone and trying to destroy them. And you've crossed that line. Destroy you? Jimmy laughed incredulously. Your ego is unbelievable. I'm asking questions, Chuck. If those questions make you uncomfortable, maybe that says more about you than it does about me. They don't make me uncomfortable, Chuck replied. What makes me uncomfortable is the dishonesty. You framed this as one thing and delivered another. That's manipulation, not journalism. The audience was at a fever pitch now, divided completely down the middle. Some were shouting support for Chuck, others defending Jimmy. The atmosphere felt combustible, like anything could happen. Jimmy's producer had given up trying to intervene, realizing this was going to play out however it was going to play out. You want to talk about manipulation? Jimmy's voice cracked with emotion. Let's talk about how you manipulate your followers. You present yourself as this American hero, this patriot, this moral authority, and they believe you because you were in action movies. That's manipulation, Chuck. Using your celebrity to push an agenda. Everyone with a platform pushes an agenda, Chuck countered. You do it every single night. The difference is I'm honest about where I stand. I don't pretend to be neutral. I don't hide behind comedy or entertainment. I say what I believe and I let people make up their own minds. And what you believe is dangerous, Jimmy shot back. It's regressive. It holds us back as a society. Chuck's eyes flashed. Dangerous according to who? You? The people who agree with you? What makes your vision of society the right one? What gives you the moral authority to decide what's progressive and what's regressive? History, Jimmy said emphatically. History is on my side. Every major social movement, every expansion of rights, every step toward equality, it's always been opposed by people like you, people who want to keep things the way they were. And history has proven them wrong every single time. History is more complicated than that, Chuck responded. And you know it. Just because something is new doesn't make it better. Just because something changes doesn't mean it's progress. Jimmy scoffed. So we should just stay stuck in the past? Is that your solution? No, Chuck said patiently. We should think critically about change. We should preserve what works and fix what doesn't. We should respect the wisdom of people who came before us, while also being open to new ideas, not blindly opposing change, but being thoughtful about it. Thoughtful, Jimmy repeated mockingly. Is it thoughtful to oppose equal rights? Is it thoughtful to resist progress on climate change? Is it thoughtful to support politicians who want to roll back protections for vulnerable people? You keep making these broad accusations without specifics, Chuck observed. You're painting with the broadest brush possible, because you can't actually pin anything concrete on me. You don't like my politics, fine. But don't pretend I'm some kind of villain because I see the world differently than you do. Jimmy's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. You are a villain to the people hurt by the policies you support. You are a villain to the communities marginalized by the rhetoric you embrace. And you standing here acting like you're the victim, that's the most offensive part of all. Chuck stared at him. And for the first time, real anger flickered across his face. I've spent my entire life trying to help people, Jimmy. I've built programs for at-risk youth. I've supported veterans. I've mentored thousands of young people. And you have the audacity to call me a villain? What have you done besides sit behind a desk and lecture people? I use my platform to fight for what's right, Jimmy insisted. I call out injustice when I see it. You give voice to people who already agree with you, Chuck corrected. You create an echo chamber where anyone who thinks differently is shouted down or mocked. That's not fighting for justice. That's building a cult of personality. Jimmy's hands clenched into fists. I'm done with this. You came here, you sat in that chair, and you're going to answer for the things you've said and done. Answer to who? Chuck asked. You? You're not a judge, Jimmy. You're not a moral authority. You're a talk show host. And you're way out of line. I'm out of line? Jimmy's voice rose to a shout. You come on my show, you spread your toxic ideas, and I'm out of line for calling you on it? I haven't spread anything, Chuck said, his voice calm but forceful. I've answered your questions. I've defended my beliefs. But you're not interested in my answers. You're interested in a confession. You want me to admit I'm wrong, to apologize for thinking differently than you. And that's never going to happen. The security team was now positioned at the edge of the stage, ready to step in if things turned physical. The audience had gone from excited to genuinely concerned. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was real conflict, raw and unfiltered. You're unbelievable, Jimmy said, shaking his head. You really think you're the good guy here, don't you? You really think standing firm in your ignorance is some kind of virtue? And you really think attacking someone for their beliefs is progressive? Chuck countered. You think tearing people down makes you enlightened? You're everything you claim to hate, Jimmy. You're intolerant, you're close-minded, and you're using your power to punish anyone who doesn't fall in line. Jimmy stepped forward again, his face inches from Chuck's. Get off my stage. Chuck didn't move. I'm already leaving. But I'm doing it on my terms, not yours. No, Jimmy said through clenched teeth. You're doing it because you can't handle the truth. You're doing it because when someone finally stands up to you, you fold. You're not tough, Chuck. You're a coward hiding behind a tough guy image. Chuck's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried through the entire studio. I've faced down people a lot more intimidating than you, Jimmy. I've been tested in ways you can't imagine, and I've never backed down from a real fight. But this isn't a fight. This is a circus, and I'm not going to be your clown. He turned to walk off stage, and Jimmy grabbed his arm. We're not finished. Chuck looked down at Jimmy's hand on his arm, then back up at Jimmy's face. Yes, we are. Take your hand off me. For a moment, the entire studio held its breath. The two men stood locked in that position, Jimmy's hand still gripping Chuck's arm, Chuck's eyes boring into Jimmy's. Then slowly, deliberately, Chuck removed Jimmy's hand. Don't ever put your hands on me again, Chuck said quietly. Jimmy stumbled back, more from shock than force. You're threatening me? On my own show? I'm not threatening anyone, Chuck replied. I'm setting a boundary, and if you had any respect for boundaries, we wouldn't be in this situation. He walked toward the edge of the stage and Jimmy followed, still shouting. Run away, Chuck. Show everyone what you really are. A fraud. A fake. All talk and no substance. Chuck stopped at the stage edge and turned back one final time. His voice was clear and strong. I'm not running from anything. I'm walking away from toxicity, from dishonesty, from someone who cares more about being right than being decent. You wanted to make a point tonight, Jimmy. Congratulations. You made one. You showed everyone exactly who you are. With that, Chuck Norris walked off the stage to a mixture of applause and boos. Jimmy stood there, chest heaving, face red, pointing after him. Don't come back. You hear me? Don't ever come back to this show. The cameras kept rolling as Chuck disappeared backstage, never looking back. Jimmy turned to the camera, trying to regain his composure but failing. Well, there you have it, folks. Chuck Norris, everyone. We'll be right back. So what do you think about what happened tonight? Was Chuck right to walk off? Or was Jimmy just doing his job? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe because we're going to be following this story as it develops. What do you think the fallout from this will be?